Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, on this smashing Sunday for what is going to be nothing short of another jam-packed daily market update. As always, we've got quite a lot to get into. We're going to be starting things off with Friday's close for the markets, certainly the S&P 500. And I'm certainly breathing a major sigh of relief as the S&P 500 has gone on and put in a new high after the kind of trials and tribulations that markets have generally gone through on the back end of the uncertainty introduced by tariffs and such things. And actually, we've said, and we've been right thus far, that we're far more optimistic on Trump's economic American plan than perhaps many people are. And Trump's like Marmite for most people. People will either love or hate him. But what I try and do is perhaps move away from my own biases and political biases and look at how I think he's going to impact the markets. And we've said he's going to do some things with oil. We know, obviously, oil sort of spiked in the Iran-Israel conflict. However, it's sort of coming back down. I still think oil's going to go drastically lower. And I think he's actually going to do good things for the markets generally. And of course, that was really tested our thesis on that with this recent pullback, which actually invalidated the S&P's uptrend of high highs and high lows. You put in a new low here. You've now gone on and balanced it out with a new high. So a major sigh of relief as I'm concerned. Let's listen to what Scott Bessant has to say on this. Then we've got news in regards to what Trump had to say on Bitcoin, but more broadly, the crypto industry, specifically on Friday. We'll take a little look at Bitcoin. We'll update you on the XRP lawsuit. Actually, they're just both simply going to drop it and not appeal. And then we'll get you ready for the week ahead. So, very happy, and it's relevant to us as crypto investors because we all kind of feed from the same trough, if you will. The S&P 500's falling off a cliff. There's likely a reason for it, and crypto's potentially going to or likely will follow. It's actually held up, and this was a remark made by I believe Trump, or it might have been Bessant. It was one of the two. Could have even been David Sachs. I do apologize, guys, but one of them essentially said, look, it's remarkable how well crypto's held up despite the kind of volatility we've seen in the markets, and that's because there's a clear trajectory for it. So really happy to see this. It's relevant to us because if markets generally were selling off, and the S&P 500 is kind of a barometer for all markets, if you will, certainly US markets, the largest markets, then crypto's likely not going to do too well. But the fact that we've gone on and put in a high here is fantastic. We can take our sort of Fibonacci retracement tool off and look for continuation, which should mean general continuation for risk assets. We haven't done it in a while, but I'm going to go ahead and find my Bitcoin versus the SPY chart. So this is so Bitcoin versus the SPY. So Bitcoin, the SPY's just gone on and put a new high. I think Bitcoin's, that typically is going to lead to continuation to the upside for the S&P 500. Bitcoin's actually going to outperform that according to Bitcoin divided by the SPY, and has been thus far. And I think Bitcoin's going to become a clear winner moving forwards. Even if I'm not a believer in the Satoshi story, I think the narrative's there, and I think that's going to continue to be propagated. And my play on Bitcoin is, of course, minus. Let's dive into what Scott Bessant had to say generally on things related to the markets. Of course, he even mentions the S&P. And then we're going to move on to what Trump had to say on Friday and talk about the XRP case and other such things. Let's get into this.
Seeing very low numbers, and forget imported inflation, because if we were to get it from tariffs, which has not happened, it doesn't have to happen, that's a small part of the inflation calculations. What we're seeing is service inflation drop. I think we're going to see the rent component drop, and the overall housing component, which is implied owners' rents drop. So the Fed's measure of supercore inflation is way down. PCE year over year is down. So it looks like the trends are quite good. We're at a 4-year low in gasoline prices, so we're going to have a great summer travel season. And Morgan, one thing I heard you talking with your colleague earlier, where they talked about the April tariff panic. So we found out today, this episode from April 3rd to today is the fastest bounce back after a 15% decline in S&P history. Fastest bounce back ever. So, the administration doesn't look at the stock market every day. What we try to do is set in place economic fundamentals, and presumably the market had a chance to digest the panic and is looking forward. So, I think it is telling you that the tariff panic, or as I like to call it, tariff derangement syndrome, was overdone. We're seeing earnings growth. We're seeing a good path for interest rates. So, I think the economy is looking pretty good.
And we'd happen to agree with what Scott Bessant has to say there. Again, it's important for us as crypto investors to understand what's happening with markets more broadly. And I think this is a very positive sign that we've seen on Friday's close. And generally, we're far more optimistic on Trump's America. And of course, that's a big statement, right? But from a kind of market point of view, then I think perhaps many people were. And Scott Bessant also sort of highlights the delusionism, the kind of fear that was going on at the bottom here. We said actually that typically makes for a great opportunity because it's seldom that retail and sentiment surveys like that are correct. And of course, Bitcoin during this time period, it certainly dipped a lot less, perhaps not from a percentage point of view, but in regards to a scale point of view, it's obviously recovered on the back end of that falling wedge. You know, I think Bitcoin really right now is just ran into an all-time high. This is likely going to set up for continuation. I could actually see this turning into, go down to the 4 sort of hourly, a bull flag, and we get continuation off the back end of this. I think you're on the cusp of that as we're speaking. You know, I think this is flag-like structure. I think ultimately this is going to lead to continuation. So I think we've got a good week ahead of us for crypto, good week ahead of us for markets as we see continuation in what's now a recovered uptrend. Before we move on and get into Bitcoin in a little bit more specifics and talk about the XRP case, let's dive over to what Trump had to say on Friday about crypto specifically. Extremely bullish. There was a billionaire talking about 40% allocation towards crypto. And one of the reasons he cited was because everybody in Trump's cabinet owns and is a supporter of this technology. So let's go ahead and dive over to that.
And I was in Bitcoin then, not knowing if I was going to do it a third time. So it's become amazing. I mean, it's the jobs that it produces. And I notice more and more you pay in Bitcoin. I mean, people are saying it takes a lot of pressure off the dollar. And it's a great thing for our country. So I don't care about investing. You know, I have kids and they invest in different things. They do believe in it. But I'm president, and what I did do there is build an industry that's very important. And, you know, if we didn't have it, China would.
Age couldn't be more set. You know, I think wherever you look in the crypto space, probably barring Twitter and famous bear accounts that have been wrong consistently, it's just a very bullish picture. I think the S&P recovering and recovering its trend and putting in a new high is marvelous. It's really I think it's a very bullish sign for markets generally. I think crypto is going to benefit from that, but has its own amazing, unique narrative. The internet of value is being formed, which goes far beyond Bitcoin. But Bitcoin, I think, is a real great narrative in regards to an alternative asset that people can speculate on and make money on. There was a blow on Friday or whatever day it was, could have been Thursday, and that was that Judge Torres had essentially denied the notions that were put forward in regards to the settlement taking place. And this is obviously what Stuart Aldultry had to say. He said, with this, the ball is back in our courts. The court gave us 2 options: dismiss our appeal challenging the findings on historic institutional sales, or press forward with the appeal. Stay tuned. Either way, XRP's legal status as a non-security remains unchanged. In the meantime, it's business as usual. And of course, Judge Torres has denied it. And this is what Brad Garlinghouse has to say. Ripple is dropping our cross appeal, and the SEC is expected to drop their appeal, as they've previously said. We're closing this chapter once and for all and focusing on what's most important: building the internet of value, lock in. So a good result, I think, overall. There's always a silver lining. I think this just means that it gets closed in a different manner. I think everyone's going to be glad to see the back end of it so that they can sort of get in or get on with actually building the internet of value, which Ripple was created to do. And of course, he's telling you to lock in here. A little bit about the week ahead. We have obviously the Fed's speech, or a number of speeches by Federal Reserve members on Monday. We then have a speech from Jerome Powell on Tuesday, so rather active. And then, of course, we've got non-farm payroll on Thursday instead of Friday, as it's the US Independence Day. We've also got another speech from another Fed member and US ISM servicing PMIs. And I wonder, we're still yet to really see a sort of business cycle as far as purchasing managers indexes and things like this are concerned. So have we got that ahead of us potentially? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to love and leave you on that note. Stay tuned next week. We'll keep you up to date on everything going on in the markets, certainly relating to the crypto markets. Very bullish sign that the S&P closed a high or put in a new high. And of course, we think Bitcoin and generally markets are all going to benefit from the conditions that they're now under. That's it from me, guys. I'm going to love and leave you. Thanks for watching. See you soon.